if you are an entrepreneur, if you want to move forward, you can keep your awareness up. But until you feel that gut punch, you don't know when the gut punch is coming. You can, if you're really in tune with who you are, you might have some semblance of earlier awareness. But if you are the type of person who's like, I'm driven, I'm going, all or nothing, let's crush it, you tend to not be the person that goes, this may burn out, so let me stop sooner and check myself, right? I think the more important question is, when it happens, how earlier can you course correct?
Welcome, everybody, to the Wednesdays Off podcast. My guest today is my good friend, Doug Polster. He is co-owner and partner at Thriving Center of Psychology. He is a good friend of mine. We've gotten to know each other really intimately, and I think you'll learn a lot from today's conversation. Doug, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Stavros. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, during the interview process, I ask folks, what is one thing that you know to be true or one lie that you kind of had to overcome, right? Those are two sides of the same question. And your answer stuck with me, which was, I wish I would have asked for help earlier. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Tell us what that means to you.
Yeah. So I start out to be an entrepreneur in my path, and I went to graduate school to be a psychologist. And I guess there's an unintentional entrepreneur nature to that, because a lot of psychologists do go into private practice, and that's an entrepreneurial pursuit, albeit maybe not as traditional startup oriented as many people may think. But as I got through my training and realized that I didn't want to be in the standard field of psychology, I pretty much started my entrepreneurial pursuits thinking that I had to do everything by myself. I needed to be my own boss. Therefore, I needed to start something by myself, no help, prove it to myself and whoever else I wanted to prove it to. And that's how I would find happiness. And that's how I could really own my future. And the result of that was I did nothing, realistically. I had a part-time W-2 job. I had started a small private practice that was really niche and not necessarily growing at any significant rate. Nor being incredibly financially rewarding, and it was kind of stagnant. And how I, in hindsight, learned that I couldn't do it by myself was accidental. I had a buddy that I was in fellowship with at UCLA, a neurologist friend of mine. We both liked fitness. We both liked the brain. And we both had been independently exploring these ideas of combining physical exercise and cognitive training. And we were chatting in the clinic one day and decided, let's try to put something together. And partnering up with him in the beginning, which wasn't even a formal company, it was more of a side project, creating this new exercise program. In the moment, I don't think I realized it, but looking back, that was the first big step towards anything I made. And it's because I had a partner. So that was the first, I think, moment when I look back and realize it, but I didn't realize it at the time. The real aha came when that side project turned into a company. We had to raise money, and I didn't know how to raise money, and I didn't ask anybody for help. And so we didn't raise any money for 6 months, and we lost a lot of traction. We didn't really make any moves. And then finally I reached out to a college buddy of mine who was in the VC space, and I put my ego aside and I said, I have no idea what I'm doing. How do I raise money? And in about a 45-minute conversation, he explained Safe Notes to me. And about 3 months later, we raised $365,000. So that is when I live realized it. Wow, you don't need to know everything. And the more you surround yourself with smart people, the farther you can go. And when you have a partner, there's that accountability that also holds you to a higher purpose to push you forward.
So, that sounds fairly obvious, right? If you were just to ask somebody, if you don't know how to do something, how should you do it? And they'll be like, well, go ask someone who knows how to do it. That feels like why don't we do that? So many of us don't do that. Why don't we do that?
Ego, man, ego, right? If we can do it all by ourselves, what a rush, right? As simple as walking into Home Depot, right? Most people don't want to ask where the saw is, right? Where are these flowers? They want to find it themselves, because there's a little dopamine rush there, right? You did it all by yourself. You didn't have to ask for help. I think it's the same in business, right? There's a lot you can do on your own, and there's a ton that's rewarding from being like, wow, I did this, right? But if it starts to hold you back from more success, I think you're putting your ego ahead of your success.
I've definitely met people who then have the superpower of putting that aside and asking for help with, even something that they feel they may know they would still ask for help because they're like, well, maybe I'll learn something I didn't. Maybe I'll learn more. You know what I mean? They're so, I don't know if it's a humility or if it definitely takes a sense of humility, but I've definitely met entrepreneurs who have that superpower. And they're always just asking for advice, for help, for input.
That's me today. That's me today. I have very much realized that even if I'm super confident in a decision, if it's an environment I haven't engaged with before, I'll check. Sometimes that can also have the same effect of not asking for help though, because if you're asking for help all the time, it could also slow you down, right? So for example, if you're making a new compensation plan like I'm doing now, and you've never made a comp plan before, right? It's probably a good idea to talk to somebody who's made a comp plan before, but trying to find the person to talk to that you've trust that might be helpful could take a few weeks. And maybe that's weeks you didn't have to spare. So it ends up becoming another way of avoiding, which not asking for help wasn't the same case. So there's a balance there. But I'm definitely someone who has tried to learn through experience that reaching out to experts, to people who know what they're talking about, even if it's not to ask them how to do it, but more of to just run a few things by them, try to build your confidence. Maybe you knew 95% of what they said, but they had 5% of the conversation that was new information for you that's helpful and that you can use moving forward. So I think through experience, I've definitely learned that. I don't know if I call it a superpower at this point, but I've definitely something that I do more often than not now.
Scaling Up Compensation, by the way, is the book to read. It's very short and it does a wonderful, wonderful job of it's not the mechanics of compensation around like HR policy, but it is the psychology of compensation and structuring it. So if that's useful to a listener, if that's useful to you, I'd pick it up. And in today's day and age, you could probably just go to ChatGPT and ask for a summary of it and get 80% of the way there too. So
that's pretty much what I've been doing. And see, even in this environment, I even asked for help and got help. So just sharing your common struggles, I think, leads to people helping.
So Doug and I both belong to an organization called Entrepreneurs Organization, EO, which is where we met. We became forum mates. We got to know each other really well. And one of the things I've always relied on Doug for is to help me get out of my own way. And sometimes I'll share a struggle, like you're saying with you, and you are really good at kind of helping me question an assumption I didn't even realize I was making. And making that very, very clear, like just taking that layer away, all of a sudden just kind of adds a whole bunch of clarity to the situation and the decision almost feels obvious. How did you develop that skill?
Well, it's part of my training, 5 years of grad school, 2 years of fellowship, on the job training. I also think I talked to my wife about this and my family, how much of this is pure training and how much was sort of how my brain worked that led me to the field I'm in, that then supplemented how my brain worked into making it do it better. I think that's probably more akin to how I got where I'm at. But I've definitely always been somebody who tries to see through the BS and excuses and say, okay, what is the actual matter at hand here? What is the actual challenge we're dealing with? And I think that's helped me in the business sense and the integrator role that I'm now more formally sitting at. Is let's clear the cobwebs. Let's clear all the communication, all the conversation. Let's actually ask the right question to get at the right problem. Because most of the reason why I think we don't move forward is we don't actually know the right question to then get to the right root cause and problem that we're trying to address. So we spin sort of on the surface, and we can spin ourselves into paralysis, or myself included, right? It's easier for me to do this with other people than even just for myself. But I think we end up spinning our wheels on the surface of an issue, and the quicker we can get to the depth of it, to the core issue, the sooner we can move forward, or we can make a decision to not. Like I tell my private practice clients that, like, just because we found the reason in the core issue doesn't necessarily mean you have to do anything. Sometimes acknowledging is enough. More often than not, we tend to do something about it.
So that resonates more with my personal experience of not asking for help. Usually I don't ask for help, not because I'm not the guy. I mean, nobody does this anymore, but you used to have to stop at a gas station to ask for directions, right? And maybe back in those days, I probably would have resisted that. But these days, I'm not that guy, right? Like if I don't know something, I'm asking everybody, I'm looking, I'm researching.
I think that you're not that guy anymore, Stavros.
Well, I went to school and I studied creativity. And what my whole reason for wanting to find the way was creativity, was that I believe that I was creative enough to find a solution. And I love busting assumptions and I love thinking of unusual answers. And that's my sweet spot. But when I went to study it and made it my profession, I realized how powerful a tool it is and how sparingly it should be used. And I'm not trying to tell anybody that they shouldn't be creative, but I was trying to be creative in every single moment of my day. And now I've really learned to appreciate that 95% of the problems have already been solved. And my job is a search function. It's a search task to go figure out the solution rather than an invention function, which is to invent a solution. So that was the transformation for me. But when I don't ask for help, it's because I'm spinning my wheels and I don't know that what I actually need is help. I don't know the right question to ask, so I don't know how to go out there and ask it. That's when I get paralyzed now.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen that, and I've had that happen to me in the last year or so. As our company has evolved, as my position in the company has evolved, I found myself way more on an island of knowledge. I'm a psychologist by training, right? My partner is a psychologist by training, our CEO, right? We have really productively failed forward in our success. And as we've reached this sort of next level of growth, we've realized that we need to surround ourselves with people smarter than us, number one. But before we realize that, things like rolling out a new tech stack or finances, right? I eventually got to the point where I was where you were. I was spinning my wheels, and I think I said, we need a fractional CFO. And both my partner and I could not understand what we needed them for. Mm-hmm. But I just knew that we didn't have financial knowledge. And so companies have finance people. So I actually used EO Network. And I said, does anybody know anything about fractional CFOs? And I called somebody through the EO Network. And I started the conversation by saying, I have no idea what I want. I don't know the right questions to ask. I just think we need someone that knows money in my company. Can you help me find the right questions to ask? And in EO, for those of you listening that know it, everyone's really helpful. And in a 20-minute conversation, I had it about 80% there. I did the same thing with tech stack. I called a guy who was a head of tech at a company, and I said, I'm trying to roll out a new tech stack. I know nothing about rolling out tech stacks. What are the questions I should be asking? What are the problems I should be looking for? So I've gotten that far now where I'm a little bit less in my head about those questions and realizing that if you get to the right people, they have the questions that you should be asking. They know the problems you've gone through, and they can lead you there. And people more often than not are super helpful. And I think showing up like that also puts your ego aside clearly for them, and they get a chance to flex their muscles. So I found that process pretty helpful of just, if I'm spinning, okay, let me just go to somebody and say, I'm spinning. I think this thing is important. What are the right questions they're asking? What am I really trying to solve for? And usually I get to a pretty good resolution.
There's a creativity version of that too, which is called beginner's mindset. And so even if like usually when you're really stuck and it's an invention problem, right? It's not just a research function. It's a real invention problem. You almost have to return to that state of not knowing, because your current knowledge is what's getting in the way of the solution you really need. And so figuring out a way to adopt that beginner's mindset is usually what leads to those breakthroughs. And I think about that a lot because one of the things I love is just going on adventures. And I love learning through adventures, not just learning whatever it is that I'm doing, but learning some other reflection, like reflecting on the rest of life, but learning through this analogy. And what I found is that when I'm learning a new skill, by default, I have to be in a beginner's mindset. But in the back of my mind, as I'm thinking about whatever I'm going through in life or whatever skill I'm trying to learn, I'm learning these analogous things, which then teach me about that. So it's kind of like a hack I put myself through to get into that beginner's mindset.
It makes sense. That makes sense. I like that beginner's mindset. Yeah.
I know you worked with high performance athletes for a while. So being a high performance individual, talking about entrepreneurship, which is very much a high performance game. What can we learn from high performance athletes? What similarities did you see? What differences?
I would almost say they're identical. So in my clinical career, I worked with athletes, both from the performance anxiety standpoint and injury recovery standpoint. So predominantly concussion recovery, but I also did Tommy John, ACL, these long recovery processes where your mind can play tricks on you and not make you feel safe to get back on the field of play. Anxiety, what I learned about high performers is for what I'll call the general population, right? Not high performers, anxiety leads to what we call traditional avoidance or procrastination, right? You're worried that something bad may happen, so you don't do a thing, right? And that's very stereotypical in all types of anxious avoidance. And at its minimum, it's like, I just don't want to check my email, so I'm going to procrastinate. In the back of your mind, there's something that's like, well, if I check my email, then I'm going to have to do this and I have to do this and I don't want that. So there's the avoidance, right?
I've never understood that behavior. I've observed that behavior time and time again. I've never understood it. It's always gone over my head. I'm like, why are you avoiding this thing?
Yes. So with high performance athletes, and it's interesting, my career sort of serendipitously led away from athletes and into consulting and therapy consultation with entrepreneurs, because they ended up having the same mindset. And because I was an entrepreneur, there was like a goodness of fit there, I guess. But the avoidance still exists, but it exists more in an ass backwards way. It's almost an avoidance of not doing anything, right? So there's this idea, and Brennan put this to me really well. He told me point blank, Brennan's very successful, in the financial industry. He said, Doug, he goes, performance isn't my problem. He goes, my problem is, what if I can't keep up this performance? And that was like, I don't think I told him this before. And if you listen to the podcast, I'll hear it again. Like, what a groundbreaking moment for me clinically to realize that this is what most high performers are going through. Even if they don't have clinical anxiety, like Brennan doesn't have clinical anxiety, right? But just that performance mindset, which is, I have to perform this well, right? I am performing this well. Whereas that general population person maybe isn't performing how they want to. These people are performing at a high level, but the concern becomes like, what if I can't keep it up? Or, what's going to happen if I fail? And that weirdly still drives them to perform. But at certain levels, it can become unhealthy and unhelpful, or in certain areas of their life, it becomes unhelpful. And so I used to tell my clients that in traditional cognitive psychology, we call that all or nothing thinking, right? I'm either all good or all bad. We call that a cognitive distortion. And traditional therapy would say cognitive distortions are bad. You shouldn't have that distortion. Let's get rid of it, right? Or let's be more aware of it and try to modify it. And I twisted that a little bit for my high performance. And I say, look, that's actually your superpower. Like, that's a great mindset 80 to 90% of the time. But if you're applying it in 100% of situations, you will eventually break or devolve the situation. So at work, that might be a great mindset. With your wife, it may not be, right? Or in certain areas at work that helps you, in other areas it doesn't. So my job was to help them get more mindful and aware of when that mentality was accidentally getting in their way. I call it their accidental Achilles heel, and getting in their way of actually maintaining performance, or burning them out rather, to help them kind of shift appropriately when necessary without losing the core of who they were, of that sort of push forward and persevere.
So what I heard you say is that the general population, when they experience anxiety, they avoid confronting the thing or doing the thing. But what you're saying is, for this group of high achievers, these performers who a lot of entrepreneurs fit that category, what they're actually avoiding is rest. What they're actually avoiding is relaxation, downtime, recovery, because they're so anxious about not being able to continue to perform at the standard that they do, that they're always pushing themselves. So, wow.
Yeah. So I had, interestingly, so this is maybe a quasi example of it, but I had a football player at UCLA. He was referred by my buddy who was a sports med doc, who said, we're not sure, maybe this guy's anxious. We're not sure, right? Check him out. So I talked to him and I was like, in these moments when you're feeling anxious, and I use quotes on purpose, what's going through your mind? What are you thinking about? And he's like, what do you mean? Thoughts? I was like, yeah, sometimes we think, sometimes we have thoughts. Here's your homework for this week. Go home and think. Just think in these moments. And he came back and he was like, Doc, I'm bored. And so what ended up happening was this is a guy who had retired from football while he was in college. His life had been scheduled. I don't know if you know anything about D1 athletics, but their life is scheduled to the T, and they're not in control of their schedule. They're told when to go to the doctor, when to study, and all this. So he now had no structure, and he had hyperhidrosis. He was a really sweaty guy. So he was sitting there bored, sweating, and thought it was anxiety. Mm-hmm. Right? But it wasn't, right? Because he was just so used to being on the move so much that it was so different and unique to him that he thought maybe he was anxious because he was sweating and he had some physiological symptoms. None of that turned out to be true. Right. So I think that's a weird extreme example, but I think it's a huge component of high performers, that sitting still equals bad.
Yeah. Right.
Not moving forward equals bad. And that mindset typically leads them to a lot of success. If you don't find I don't say balance, that's maybe not the right term, but if you don't find the helpful differentiation between pushing and pulling, right? Pushing and stopping, you may still achieve immense business and financial success, but at the cost of maybe happiness, family life success, interpersonal, contentment and all that. And when I worked with my clients, I'd say, I'm not telling you not to do that. My job is to make you aware of what's going on, and you can make that choice. I'm a big, big believer in choice. Once you have awareness, and someone may say, I'm okay with not being happy. This is more important to me. I'll say, okay, maybe I'll see you in 2 years and we'll talk again.
Right.
Well, it's still a choice at the end of the day. I think awareness is a huge part of what I think
At least helps
iron out the choice.
my experience, and I think speaking to a lot of entrepreneurs, is we all start out highly energized about whatever we're building, and we go down that path and we're doing it and we start to identify with it, and it's very rewarding. And it could theoretically at some point become manic, right? We're just driven that way. And then a day shows up where you're just like, well, I didn't realize the price I had paid for ignoring that other stuff, or how disconnected I became from myself. Like, I'm doing these things, I'm checking, I'm going through the motions, but I no longer have that same energy. I'm now doing it because I was scheduled to do it, because, those kinds of things, as opposed to, I still care about this deeply and a lot. And that's when I think the telltale sign for me is when your business becomes about your dollars and your bottom line, and not about the impact you're having in the world. For me, when I go back and think about historically the different businesses that I had and ran, when I made that shift and I was like, okay, I now understand how this is a money machine and I'm going to push all the money buttons, that's usually right around the time that I had that's when my burnout clock probably started, until, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. And I thought that you were going to ask me, maybe I'll ask the rhetorical question, is how you not let that happen. And this may be a very cynical point of view, is I don't think you can. I had a mentor of me once said, I talked about these ideas for like prevention therapy and all this. And one of my mentors said to me once, because Doug, Americans pay for treatment, not prevention. They pay for intervention, not prevention. I thought that was a really interesting line. And I think it's mostly true. And I don't think that there's, for anyone listening, right, saying like, well, how do I make sure that doesn't happen? I don't know if that's possible. If you are so driven, if you are an entrepreneur, if you want to move forward, you can keep your awareness up. But until you feel that gut punch, you don't know when the gut punch is coming. If you're really in tune with who you are, you might have some semblance of earlier awareness. But if you are the type of person who's like, I'm driven, I'm going, all or nothing, let's crush it, you tend to not be the person that goes, this may burn out, so let me stop sooner and check myself, right? I think the more important question is, when it happens, how earlier can you course correct?
It's different early in your life and later in your life. Like, the more life you have, the more wisdom you accumulate, the more experience you have. If you actively are trying to live a more fulfilled life, I believe you can catch yourself earlier and earlier.
If you have the experience of being probably punched once or twice. If you haven't been punched yet,
correct,
then chances are there's no preventing getting punched. And then it's all about how do you react and learn and become more aware, so that the next time you're less likely to get punched, or it's just not as hard of a punch, doesn't last as long, right? And every time you iterate, you get more and more aware. Or this is your first time around the bend and you're that type of driven person, I don't think you really stop until you get punched.
I agree. I have these 5 practices, as you know, and my very first one is talk to yourself, right? And it's just taking time to reflect. Whether you run and think or whether you write, it doesn't really matter. But for me, that practice of active reflection, what it's done for me, what it does is it shrinks the cycle between me going off course, understanding that I don't feel aligned with myself, and correcting. And it used to be on the magnitude of years, right? It used to be on the magnitude of being off course for years. And through the practice of reflection and getting to know myself and just being active, I think I have it down to, maybe weeks. Course correction takes weeks now as opposed to years. And sometimes just moments or hours, right? If I'm really lucky and it's a smaller kind of thing. But there's still those blind spots, those areas where I also feel like life rhymes, history rhymes, right? So you make a mistake in one domain and you learn from it. And then you go about your life, and then 3 years later, you find you're making the same mistake, but you're making it at a whole other order of magnitude, if that makes sense, at a kind of evolved version of that same mistake, because the same wiring still exists back here that got you to that thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And chances are you've avoided the lesser version of that mistake because of your learning, and then you just keep pushing forward, and there's a new level of that mistake that you didn't know existed. So I say, like, wouldn't it be great if we could manufacture resilience, right? If we could feel resilient without having to go through hard times, that would be awesome. But we can't, right? And so I almost laugh at some of the like the entrepreneur advice that's out there that I remember hearing early on. So like our first company, our training, the cognitive fitness company, right? we got a lot of advice. You got to test the product. You got to do this, like product market fit. You got to get feedback, blah, blah, blah. And we just ignored it because we didn't know any better. Everyone told us the right thing, but we had to do the wrong thing. And now in hindsight, I go, that was absolutely the worst idea we had. We iterated for 2.5 years with no direct client user feedback. Making no sense. But if I'm being truthful, if I go back in time, not knowing what I know now, I would have done the same thing again until I got punched in the stomach and realized it didn't work. Right. And I think that's the unfortunate truth, I think, of entrepreneurship is you can get a lot of advice and you can listen to a lot of people, but you have to be punched. But being punched means you're trying. Because if you don't try, you'll never get punched. If you never get punched, you'll never be resilient. You'll never learn. Right. And so getting punched, I think, is part of the act of entrepreneurship because it means you're engaging. It means you're testing limits. It means you're trying. And realistically, the sooner you get punched, the better, because then if you're mindful and aware, the learning curve accelerates drastically from there.
Yeah, for me, entrepreneurship boils down to the core entrepreneurial skill is figuring out how to learn as cheaply as possible. And what I mean by that is by spending as little money, as little time, and as little of your reputation as possible to learn. And the minute you switch your focus to learning rather than succeeding, the easier the success comes because you're focused on learning, which goes back to your point about ask for help, right? Like it's one in the same. It's ultimately about learning.
That's a great definition. I like that one.
Yeah. I mean, I had a lot of students. I taught entrepreneurship at USF, and the thing I would tell them all, they were like, they would wait till they were going to graduate to start their companies, and they were like, I'm trying to think of, like, you're in school now. Start the company now. I was like, this is not going to be your perfect company. It's definitely going to go bankrupt, or you're definitely going to outgrow it. It's going to be a mistake no matter what it is. But if you don't do this now to make that mistake, there is no version of the successful company in the future, right? So like, That's the number one thing is just when it's cheap, make the mistakes. That's how you learn. So
I think one of the other switches that flipped for me is I was that kid that you're describing, right? So many things I should have tried and should have started that I didn't. And I look back at why. And I could give you probably a bunch of surface level reasons. This would take a lot of money, or, I didn't have the time, which is not true, or it's a lie. But at the end of the day, I was so focused on, could this make me money? Could this get me to a certain number? That I had kind of been through some mentorship, like, I've been asked that question, like, well, do you know your number? Do you know your goal? You know you want to be financially? So I, in my early 20s, I thought that's how you're supposed to think. Maybe it is a helpful way for some people to think. But for me, it was incredibly paralyzing because every idea that came into my mind was tied to, how am I going to make money on this? And then eventually would just come crumbling down because it seemed overwhelming. And it wasn't until I found help, I got a partner, that I stopped thinking about money. And I just started thinking about, do I like this? Can I do this on the side while I get some money elsewhere? And in both, one of those pursuits is technically not unsuccessful yet, right? Our train is in a resurgence, right? My partner's opened a gym, and the app is now being used in live training scenarios. So that's technically still alive. And obviously Thriving Center has been pretty successful so far. And none of that has been about, I need to make this amount of money. The company needs to be able to generate this amount of money for it to be successful. It's just been about learning. And I never thought about it through like the money lens. Once I stopped my shift away from, this has to be able to generate $1 million of revenue, and ideas would crumble. But you're right. In hindsight, that's actually learning. That's what was driving me versus money. And the money comes or doesn't come, but at least you enjoy it.
My version of that was, I grew up being told I was smart. I grew up being told that I had a lot of potential. I was lucky enough to be in a family that gave me both the genetics and the support for that to be the case. And the lens I would use would be like, I can't do this. This isn't good enough for me. I need a bigger opportunity, right? Like, is this? And I used to treat every decision as if like, this is it. Like, this is what I'm going to settle for. You know what I mean? And it honestly didn't matter if I was looking at a business or if I was looking at a relationship or if I was looking at anything. I was going through that lens of like, how does this equate to the amount of potential I think I have? And there were a couple of experiences in my life, one of which was that I went to a very specialized high school, and which I'm very, very grateful for, because I was no longer the smartest kid in the room. I was nowhere near the smartest kid in the room. And that taught me the value of hard work. I actually had to apply myself in addition to having all those God-given talents that I'm so grateful for, right? Like the application is what made the difference. So that was a humbling experience. And then just giving myself permission to get started on anything, on just absolutely anything, because only through that action do you have growth. And in all honesty, Doug, I didn't actually give myself that full permission. Like I gave myself incrementally more permission. I didn't give myself that full permission until my dad passed away and my son was on his way. And there was something about not having a safety blanket anymore and knowing that I had my own responsibility at the subconscious level, which made me go, yeah, this opportunity in front of me is great. It's good enough. Let's go pursue it. And that was the beginning of my real climb as an entrepreneur, was that change in mindset.
That's a great one. That resonates, man. The idea of like, is this beneath me?
Right.
Maybe that's actually what was underlying this monetary goal, arbitrary goal I had, which is like, oh, if it can't do that, then it's not good enough, right? That I don't feel like I could feel any farther from the truth now in the world that I'm in now, right? Like, I think as much as I don't want this to happen, right? If Thriving Center crumbles, if our train never does anything, right? If the whole business world around me crumbles, weirdly, I can say I'd be okay, right? And it's like, that's not what defines me. I got no problem. I got a buddy that just bought a bunch of laundromats and I'm like, wow, that seems cool. I can own laundromats. I can own a pool cleaning business. Like just because I have a PhD, like I don't need to just do healthcare,? So I think that is a very different shift in me. And I don't know, I can't name the moment like you just could name for what that happened. Maybe becoming a father, right? Maybe experiencing some success and realizing like, oh, like you could do this everywhere. And it doesn't matter the surface level or what the perception is of the job, of the business or whatever. It just matters like, do you enjoy it? And if you like, and I'm a systems guy, like I think I enjoy the systems of the business versus my partner, right, who's the visionary. He's the big thinker. And I think I found my place in the business world. Like, I think early on, I probably told myself I needed to be the visionary, lied to myself and realized, no, I'm a systems guy, right? And I think as a systems guy, that gives me two opportunities. Number one, in an established organization, I could lead the organization, but I'm probably not going to start something from scratch on my own. I think I've realized that. And that's humbling to say, but also I think now I can recognize and say that without fear.
Let's dive into that too. I think I have some similar partner issues, if that makes sense. So I like to do things with partners. I enjoy the camaraderie of it. I do gravitate to that startup phase, right? That's where I love to live. When people ask you like, who's the customer you would serve all day long for free? For me, it's like young founders looking to start up. Like I could talk to those guys all day. I love the energy, the emotion, and they just need a little bit of direction and getting them moving. Like I could do that all day long. Startup strategy is the area that I love. But when it comes to starting my own companies, when I look back over my own entrepreneurial history, I do a lot better when I have a partner. And I don't think it's functional the way you described it, which is that you are a systems thinker, but you're not really that visionary. For me, I think I have like we have all these different assessments and they have these different buckets, right? So I have two buckets that compete. One is my social bucket and the other one is my autonomy bucket. So I have a high autonomy bucket and I have an almost as high social bucket. So if I am really autonomous and on my own, I don't find it satisfying at all if that social bucket is empty. You know what I mean? So I've made a lot of compromises in my life around business because I chose to be with partners rather than to pursue the business that I wanted because that was valuable to me. It's served me and it's hurt me. It's kind of both ways on me, but that's been my holdback in terms of starting stuff.
So I don't know if that's a holdback, man. Like, I think I like to talk to my clients about pick your pain moments, right? I don't think there are perfect choices, right? Everything has a relative sacrifice to it. And like when I'm working with an individual, my goal is to help bring to the surface what the actual options are and then look at the two most likely ones and assess the positives and the negatives. It sounds so simple, but it's true. And so could I go out on my own and do something? Yes. What would be the benefits of that, right? I'd be autonomous, right? I'd have no one to answer to. I could get 100% of the profits, all that stuff, right? What would be the negatives? Less accountability, less engagement, less camaraderie, right? The opposite, right? I go with a partner where, well, I know the positives and negatives of that. And then I have to look at it and say, for my own self, there's not a perfect solution. Which one do I like more than the other? And when I do that analysis, what that really helps me do at the end of the day is not let whatever the negatives were on either side of the coin bother me as much, because I made a choice. I was aware of it. Like sometimes I come home from work and my wife's like, oh, rough day. I have to remind myself, yes, but I chose this. I know that, leading a company through a growth phase isn't all rainbows and butterflies. So the objective stress of that is sufficient. I don't need the additive stress of, why am I doing this? This is not fun. No, I made this choice, right? And so that extra stress that can tip you over the edge, I kind of almost pre-eliminated by recognizing that I have made this distinction and this choice, and that there is no, this is all rainbows and butterflies. These are the downsides, and that's what it is. But in the world that I'm in, I would much rather choose having a partner to be accountable to enjoy working with, to challenge each other, and to pull each other out of our comfort zones when we need to be. And I feel like that drastically outweighs doing it on your own. But obviously, either one of them is not going to be perfect.
I mean, it's ultimately the self-awareness which gives you the power, right? Like you're saying, you don't feel bad because you know you made a choice. It may have been a difficult day, but you went into it expecting difficult days, and this was just one of them. And there's going to be highs, and then you're going to expect those too, right? So there's highs and lows. So that self-awareness that comes with time is really the ultimate value add, right? So you said earlier, if it all went down the tubes, I'd be okay. And I think probably what underlies you being okay is your self-awareness. Like that whole experience gave you resiliency. It gave you insight. It gave you wisdom. You could go about doing whatever you're going to do next way better than you did the first time. You know what I mean? Like,
and I think my identity is not caught up in it. And this is what I spent a lot of time in the clinical world working with athletes, right? I had a friend in grad school share this exercise with me because she was a little bit older and she would work with athletes too. And when an athlete would come in with anxiety or depression or whatever it was, not necessarily, oh, I can't shoot free throws, right? She'd have them draw on a clipboard. So I will not take credit for this. This is Megan Cannon's work. Well, she probably got it from somewhere else, but I got it from Megan. She had a little whiteboard and she asked the athlete to draw circles on that board that represented who they were, parts of their identity. And she'd draw the first one, say athlete, she'd write athlete in there. And she'd say, draw more circles. What else are you? And anecdotally, right, the higher level of distress the individual is feeling, the little amount of circles were on that thing besides athlete. Like, I'm a football player. That's all I am. You're not a friend. You're not a son. You're not a class clown. You're not a musician. You're not a music lover, right? And so if you only have one circle on that board, when it's threatened, you feel threatened to your core. That if I lose this, if I get injured, right? If I get benched, if I don't make this play, that threatens your entire identity. And so I think as an entrepreneur, we can also get caught in a very similar pattern. My company is my identity, right? Especially if it's you've birthed this thing from start, right? And so the stress can become more significant sooner on because any threat to the company is not a threat to your identity. And if you can separate those two healthily, then you can, I think number one, you'll just be happier, right? You'll just be less stressed. But number two, I also think it leads to make better decisions because one singular identity could lead to fear-based decision-making, which sometimes works for the company, but sometimes doesn't, and helps you be less objective but potentially results in being less objective. I think that's the kind of a correlation too, back to the athletes conversation, like a singular identity can result in some difficulties.
I think that's really helpful as a framework. And I definitely can see myself drawing circles and thinking about moments in my life where I would only have one circle. I want to zoom in and actually, I think that framework could also be valuable when you're thinking about relative identity, like you and your partner. It's one thing to draw a circle and say we're partners, but it's another thing to draw a circle and say we're friends. And it's another thing to draw a circle and say we were schoolmates. And it's another, you know what I mean? Whatever those, and the more circles you have with that person, the less threatening any one of those is, right? So one thing that my partner taught me how to do at the last company, which I love him for, was he would show up to our negotiations advocating for me. You know what I mean? And so because he was kind and he was generous and he was a good friend, he made his role as my friend equal to his role as my partner. And over time, I learned to do the same thing for him. And our partnership thrived because there was never a threat. Like if a certain decision needed to be made, it was never threatening to our partnership. It was always just an opportunity to help each other out because that friend circle was more meaningful and grew over time. So I like that frame, and I like how you can use it at self-identity level, but also at a relational level.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are your circles? When you think about yourself in terms of the circles in your life, and I won't make you list all 100, but what are maybe 5 or 6 that come to mind?
Well, I think dad and husband are 2 big ones. I think entrepreneur is the one that's gotten bigger over the years. I definitely think, and I would say the circle is entrepreneur. It's not co-owner of Thriving Center, if that makes sense, right? I think they're separate circles. I think son is a big one. I think, I don't know how you phrase this, but like, I don't think I was the class clown, but just like ball of energy. Like it's just part of my identity, right? You've known me for a little bit now. Like I really enjoy just being energetic, right? And I think friend is another big one on there. I really enjoy my social network and my friendship groups. So I think those are some of the top ones on there. And I think when any of those are threatened, you can feel distress. But when you have enough circles on the map, you tend to not feel as distressed for as long. Because if one circle isn't being fulfilled this week, you can jump to another one and find happiness. If the kids are being insane, you need a break, you can go see your friends, right? If your friends are out partying without you and you're feeling left out, you can go hang out with your wife, right? You can be a husband, right? So you've got these different circles you could bounce around in between that help, I think, keep some kind of homeostasis, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what you were saying about resiliency. I remember bringing on a junior partner at some point. Something big would happen in the business and it would be threatening. And the 2 senior partners, we would just be like, okay, that happens, right? Because we saw it as only one thing within a huge web of goods and bads. And, you know, you lose a client, you gain a client, where she was new to this game. And so she would see it as threatening to the whole business. And so much of it, I think, is about learning to not see things as threats, to just feel safe, right? So much of us is wired in this fight or flight mechanism, and just stopping and being like, for me, the way I phrase it is, I always used to think of fight and flight as opposites. And then I learned that feeling safe was the opposite of both of them, because those are both trauma responses to a threat. And the opposite is there is no threat. So how do you feel when there's no threat? You feel safe. My decision making is very different when I don't feel threatened than when I do feel threatened.
Oh yeah. And I think that's been the other added bonus of having a partner like I have, is when he feels threatened, I feel safe. Threatened, he feels safe. Yeah. So depending on the moment, I'm the one that he's talking off the ledge, or I'm the one that, or he's the one that's talking me off the ledge, right? Like we've had it's sort of very unintentional, but if I look back in time, it's kind of funny. Like when I'm feeling the most safe and secure, he's not. And when I'm not feeling safe and secure and I'm feeling threatened, he feels safe. And so I can call him and be like, hey, you are talking me off the ledge right now. And in 20-minute conversation, I'm like, all right, got it. And or vice versa. You can call me and be like, hey man, the sky is falling. I'm like, no, it's not. We're good. So it's a good balancing act to have that.
I love that. It makes me think of, I don't know whose this is, but there can only be one crazy person in the room at a time, or there can only be one angry customer, or so there can only be one angry person. So it's a customer service thing where if you have a customer who's upset, just becoming more upset than the customer at the problem usually helps that customer kind of calm down and know that that their problem is being addressed. So I could see the same thing with a business partner relationship.
It's very rare that we're both sitting on the phone together saying that both of us saying the sky is falling, we're not going to be okay, everything is, here. Like I don't think that's ever happened. So, yeah.
I think the other lesson that I've learned in my life, which maybe ties into, is to try to not have emotional reactions to other people's emotional reactions, right? So if somebody's coming and they're upset, like they're having an emotional reaction, and my instinct for the better part of my life was to be like, you don't get to feel that way. Like, you know what I mean? And then have my own emotional reaction. And when I was finally able to kind of go, all right, this person's having a moment. Like, it's not my job to have my own moment right now, right? It's my job. Like, And that's probably a skill that you have a lot of training on from your profession, but most of us don't, right? And so most of us.
Yeah, it's funny because my wife jokes with me all the time, maybe not jokes, but when I'm wearing the hat of a psychologist or the hat of the integrator and leader in the company, I'm pretty good at it. There's times that I'm not. And again, I think the times that I forget I'm wearing the hat, which is when I feel really comfortable and it's more people on the same level as me that can forget to wear the hat. Those times I can be maybe a little bit more emotional versus in my personal life, I'm not wearing that hat. It's a very different story, very different story. And that's interesting to me. And I've tried to become more self-aware of that, but it's almost like my resources are drained by the time I'm in my personal life. I don't have necessarily as much juice left, cognitive load, right? As we talked about the ego. Sometimes I'm not as good at it. And I think there's sometimes a little bit of Jekyll and Hyde in there. Maybe it's more uncomfortable or whatnot, but in certain areas, I'm definitely way better at that than others. And one of the things I've tried to talk to my team about and the leaders on my team is when people are upset or you have to bring something to their attention that's going to make them upset, right? Where you're sort of predicting that you'll get an emotional reaction, is to do it in an exploratory, not accusatory manner, right? And to recognize that someone is, when they are being emotional, is often presenting accusatory, but you have your option of whether you want to take it that way.
Can you give us an example? Can you play it out in a role play?
Exploratory, not accusatory.
Yeah.
Right. I think if somebody comes in and says this decision was wrong and bad and it's going to screw us and it's going to make life harder and blah, 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 blah. Right. We can respond accusatorily. Like, why do you think that way? It doesn't make any sense. Right. So you're taking accusatory, matching it with accusatory. Right. And then you're just escalating. Right. Versus an exploratory manner, which is recognizing how they're feeling and trying to understand where is it coming from. Right. Okay. Wow. This seems to not be working. Educate me. Help me understand where this is coming from, right? Or proactively, right? If you're going into somebody that hey, you're not doing a job, your response times are lower, and that's going to get a response, right? Again, entering into it exploratory, I've noticed that these response times aren't up to where they need to be. What resources do you need to help that make that happen? Or is there something going on that I'm not aware of that's really, not helping you make this achievable right now versus you're doing it wrong way, right? And I think that doesn't give you 100% success rate, but I think it plants a culture that the more you do it, the more everyone in your organization does it, the more productive that you can be. Because even if you're sitting in a leadership seat, if someone's coming to you with problems and they're coming to you in an accusatory manner, that's going to boil your water after a while. It's just hey man, or hey lady, you think we're up here trying to screw you? No, we're not. Right. So I really try to preach that, and sometimes we're good, sometimes we're not. But I really hope that becomes even more part of our culture.
What I heard in the first example is an acceptance versus a rejection of the person's reality. So it's not that you didn't ask, why do you think so? Even in the accusatory one, you led with a question, but the question was a rejection of their reality and saying, well, why isn't your reality more like my reality, right? And so I think what I heard you say there is, first thing is just accept their reality. Not that it's your reality, but accept that it's their reality. You know what I mean? And if that's their reality, then it's only logical that they're going to have the reaction they're going to have, right? So you have to start from there.
My point of the exploratory, I love the way you phrase that. So I'm talking about exploratory. It's okay, if this is their reality, right, then something has happened that has made them feel that this is happening. What is that thing? Why is this their reality? Because why it is their reality, number one, may be something that is incredibly important to your business that you need to understand, that you're blind to, or maybe absolutely nothing, or somewhere in between. If it's absolutely nothing, but this is the reality of the emotional reaction to it, you might have a bigger problem at your hands, right? You might have the wrong person in the wrong seat, right? Or you might need some retraining, you might need to help them understand better, right? And if it's somewhere in between, the chances are that's some version of that, right? Where it's oh, okay. What I've realized is most people, this is the therapist in me, right? Most people that experience distress, right, that leads to an emotional reaction, are often caught on the surface level of the problem, right? Like you said before, we're asking for help. You're just spinning in circles. You haven't actually landed on it. And the reason why the stress response is so elevated is a combination of, one, you've been spinning, and two, you don't really know why you're so pissed off. And so the combination of the two, your brain goes, well, something must be really wrong, right? And then you explode and you get really upset or anxious or frustrated, right? So I think as a therapist, but then as a leader, your job is also to help that person accepting the reality that they're experiencing and help them understand where it's coming from. And what I've learned is that most of the time, not all the time, when someone on my team is feeling strongly emotional about something, it has to do with a negative prediction about the future. Most of the time, right? If it's not like, if we do this, then what if X, Y, or Z happens in the future? So once I understand that, I get to realize, okay, this isn't a problem right now. That's a good litmus test for me. Like, is there a fire right now? No, there's not, but there could be a fire. Okay, what's the fire you're worried about? Well, the fire I'm worried about that is if we implement this new process, then it's actually going to have the opposite result we wanted to. Oh, okay. Well, as a leader, that's good to understand. Do I believe that? What makes you think that? And maybe they're right. So that reality they were reacting to is really important. Or maybe they're wrong. Or what happens most of the time in anticipatory anxiety is you don't know. Right? And so what I've tried to chip away at an organization is attending to an emotional response, assessing what the predicted outcome would be, and when that predicted outcome would value that response in the present moment, and then say, what would a Xanax be for that? So if this really thing does scary comes true, what would you need the moment you know it's true to feel better? And what that typically helps me do is then understand a litmus test of the resilience of our team, and then also figure out how to proactively intervene. And if I can say to somebody, and this is classic psychology, right? Like if you have panic attacks on airplanes and you have a Xanax in your pocket, you might not have a panic attack, even if you don't take the Xanax.
Because you know it's there.
You know it's there, right? So for my team, it's like, let me give you a Xanax, right? And then that turns evolving down the stress response from decision-making to implementation. But then we also know on implementation, here's what we might not have to do. We might have to pull the plug on this if this really bad fire happens. And now we know that, and that's a good thing. Right. And then what I've learned in my organization is we have not done that for very long. And so we've built up a negative momentum of, okay, but is Xanax. So that what if thing either does come true or there's not help coming. And so over the last 6 months or so, and I think even more so recently, I'm really trying to steer our leadership conversations towards like, what is the predicted concern? How do we instill a Xanax? How do we react like we say we're going to react to build the trust that we can treat this anxiety, right? And then create that bigger pattern so that we don't have to do it as often. So that people realize, oh, they've got this. I think one of the things that I had a conversation with one of our team members about the other day is the hardest thing to remember, I think, as an entrepreneur is most people in your company don't think like you. They're not as comfortable with risk. And that's not a bad thing. It's not good or bad. There's no, connotation to that. It's just true. And so we have to realize that, like, not everyone's got the same risk tolerance, the same cognitive flexibility, and they have different stakes. Yeah. Right. So all those things I think are really important. I don't make a tangent, but we did.
No, one of the things I hear a few bits of wisdom there. So just to summarize them, one is that uncertainty is a thing. And sometimes knowing that you have uncertainty and simply choosing to accept it is all you can do. You really can't create certainty, right? And I know from my own personal experience, I feel very grateful these days because I don't have a lot of anxiety, but there were many years where I did have anxiety, and it was all rooted in uncertainty. It was all rooted in not knowing what was going to happen. And there is nothing I can fundamentally do to increase my knowledge of what's going to happen beyond a certain point. Like, that's just fact. So I just have to learn to live with that uncertainty and not let that uncertainty cause me anxiety. And that was a real journey. That was a hard one. And I believe a lot of entrepreneurs experience that and react to that.
Oh, yeah.
I also love the lens that you're bringing to the table here, which is the working for an entrepreneur lens, right? So as entrepreneurs, when we think about our freedom, we think a lot about our own anxiety, our own situation, our own identity, but we're building organizations full of other human beings and thinking about those human beings, what impact we're having on them, what anxiety we're causing them, you know what I mean? And how to address it feels like a huge source for improvement. I know, for example, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's a slippery slope because I've always said to our organization, to my partner, I don't want to build an organization of people that hate their job, people that are so stressed. That's not in line with who I am. Same point in time, if I care about every single individual's emotions so much and become such a people pleaser, everybody loses. The whole organization can't move forward and doesn't work. So finding that balance of acknowledging the emotional state of your staff while you're building a fast-paced moving company, recognizing that you're never going to get 100% of the staff to feel 100% comfortable with the speed, pace, impulsivity of which you're working. It's not possible. It's not possible unless it's just one person. Right? And so finding that balance has been a challenge. And I think early on, being more of a people pleaser and in the seat that I was sitting, which was closer to the staff, I erred too much on the side of listening to emotions that actually ended up hurting our team.
Yeah, I believe that.
Absolutely did. And over the last year and a half, I've tried to kind of gradually shift from that into more of an acknowledgement, a root cause assessment, and then a building and an accountability and a Xanax structure to say, we still have to do this. I can't push this off anymore because we're concerned. However, we can't do it instantly today. You're right, because we still have to think about these other things. So the truth is somewhere in the middle. We can't wait 3 months, but we can't do it in 3 hours. And then what are the unintended consequences or negative predictions we think might happen? A, B, and C. Okay, cool. Do we have a solve for A and B? Yes, we do. Cool. No more uncertainty. Do we have a solve for C? No, we don't. Okay. But now we've called it out. We've named it. Everyone's going to have some version of acceptance of this, right? And now we have to move forward. But if C happens, then what? We can answer now. We don't know if it'll happen, but we can create certainty on if it does.
In a way, it kind of goes back to trying to figure out how to learn as cheaply as possible, right? And what you're adding to the list of costs is the emotional toll on your team, right? Like that's a cost, which your own emotional cost and the cost of the team, which is important to consider. But it goes back to how can we learn together? How can we learn, without compromising everything? And I love the kind of on industry Xanax analogy. I think it's it works great for your industry because everybody can understand it.
Yeah.
When I was working to kind of scale up our last company, one of the things that was really valuable is when we were talking about a project, we would intentionally take the side of one of us would show up and advocate for the client, and one of us would show up and advocate for the staff that had to deliver on the work. And I think a lot of the value we added at the end of the day was having that debate and that struggle behind closed doors and reaching a good solution. So neither the client nor the employee had to go through that struggle. Because behind the scenes, we kind of said, well, I'm here to advocate for the employees. And the other person would be like, I'm here to advocate for the client. And maybe a third time somebody say, I'm here to advocate for the shareholder. And we would just play that out and eventually kind of get to the spot where we came up with a solution that worked best for all parties.
Interesting. I like that, Ma. I can see that in certain environments working where like behind the scenes, my partner and I almost play the other side.
Yeah.
And then see what we come up with, or even with some of our managers, like, hey, you're always advocating for your team. Now I'm going to advocate for your team. You advocate for the company.
I heard that the Wright brothers used to have these kinds of debates, and then like mid-argument, they would just switch sides. Your real allegiance should be to the best answer or to the best way forward, right? We're not going to know everything, but not to any particular point of view, right? It's what's at stake that matters, not how we get there.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit. I mean, you early on, you talked about being an integrator and taking the integrator role. It's a hard role, right? And so I don't know if the people listening are familiar with the EOS model, but in EOS, which is an entrepreneurial management system, there's the role of the visionary and there's the role of the integrator. And the visionary's role is kind of create big relationships and create strategic direction for the company. And the integrator's role is the operator, right? They're really in charge of making sure that the machine works. One thing that I've found is that visionaries often don't want to do the integrator role. They maybe even feel shame around that, or they feel like they're putting a responsibility on somebody else that they don't want. You know what I mean? Like they feel bad about not doing that stuff. And similarly, integrators a lot of time don't actually want that visionary role. There's a dynamic there between two partners filling different roles, and there's blind spots and expectations from each side that aren't articulated to yourself and to the other side. And I'd love to know what your take is, kind of rising up as an integrator. And really, I've seen you kind of take ownership of that role and really fill it. You know what I mean? And so what's your learning been along the way?
I think the craziest thing is how unintentionally and accidentally perfect my partner and I are symbiotically in these roles. We didn't plan this, right? And we didn't know what EOS was when we partnered up and as we grew for the first few years. And we sort of naturally found these homes, but never talked about it at any significant degree until EOS started to come on the picture. But even prior to actually implementing EOS, which we're only 90 days into, but earlier this year is when I first started talking to him about it. And I was like, hey, we've been reading Traction. He knew we had read Traction. And we started talking about how we sort of naturally fell into these two roles. Didn't really know what that execution really looked like. And over the course of this last year, it really evolved into it. And I think the best way I could describe my experience so far as an integrator has been a translator of the vision and to help the bidirectional prioritization, right? One of the things I love about my partner is his vision, is his ideas, is his, the genesis of all the things that he's thinking about that he wants to put into action. Love all of that. What I've also realized is that information given to individuals in the company at the wrong time can be scary as hell. Mm-hmm. And so by actually creating more of this separation of church and state and beginning to have the meeting structure fall a little more into place, he's able to spread his wings and fly, use me as the translator, and not disrupt the status quo too much of the team. And he and I are then able to figure out, especially now that we've implemented these L10 meetings with the rest of the team, so what is the order of operations, right? It's also helped us recognize we can't do everything at once. I think which has been my biggest challenge is like, maybe we can. Maybe he's right. Maybe we can do it at once, right? Maybe I don't have the right pulse on the company. Maybe we can push farther. And then undoubtedly, it's typically not true. And we end up being like, well, maybe we can't do this all at once. So I think that translator component of it has been really helpful. And then operator, I mean, we have it in our accountability chart, like big ideas, parentheses, non-execution for my partner. Right. And then mine is execution, right? Take those ideas and help execute them. And I think one of the things that has been really helpful in the last couple of weeks has been when we first drew out our accountability chart, I was sitting in too many seats as well as the integrator. So I actually couldn't be a good integrator. Mm-hmm. I couldn't be a good director of clinical ops, and I couldn't be a good leader of the marketing department because I was doing too much. And so as we've hired the right people in the right seats and are promoted and are relabeled, recategorized people, come January 2nd, in theory, I will be lonely sitting in the integrator seat, no others. I have to onboard somebody. And I think that will actually be immensely personally helpful, but for the company to be really helpful. Yeah. Because now I'll actually be able to integrate and execute and make sure that the left knows what the right is doing versus getting buried in other tasks.
Did you have feelings of not feeling good enough because all of those roles needed to kind of leave you? Like, I'm thinking about my own journey here, so I don't mean to put it on you, just to ask the question if this is a shared vision. For years, I felt bad about leaning on an operator and filled the operator role myself, the integrator role myself, because I felt like, so then what am I do? Like, I didn't feel like that vision alone, which was my superpower, was adding any value. You know what I mean? But I didn't see it. Like, it was hard for me. You ever watch the conductor at the front of the, you know what I mean? Like, from a layman's perspective, I'm like, what's the need for that guy? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, and so when I play that role, I don't have the same sense of satisfaction that I'm actually delivering value the way I do when I'm helping put systems in place and when I'm helping do all of that. But in all honesty, I don't want to be the person to put systems in place. I don't want to, do all of that. And it took a while for me to learn that lesson and to feel comfortable handing it off to someone. So I guess kind of talking from a position of like former integrator fully embraced as visionary to someone who, I think you said, fully embraced now integrator. Like, what's the other side of that experience?
We talked earlier about sometimes you have to get punched in the gut, right? So I think a year and a half ago, maybe even a year ago, I would have felt that way. No, I definitely felt that way. And then I think getting punched in the gut and realizing that I personally can't do a good job in all these areas as I'm spread that thin. And then secondarily, knowing that then means the company is being held back. That's enough of a punch in the gut to go, this can't continue. The other piece of it is I didn't know what it meant to not be in those seats. So the EOS, what that did or whatever system you want to choose, right? Is it gave me a place. It gave this structure. This is what this role does. Oh, wow. That's actually who I am and what I'm good at and what I want to do and what's best for the company. Like it checked all the boxes. So I think that was what was missing, is like the pain points started to come up to the surface, but then I didn't know. I said, well, I'm just supposed to do this, right? And then when this magical structure accountability chart came into place and I read the first chapter of Get a Grip, I was like, oh, wait, that's me and my partner. That's exactly how this would work. Okay. And then very clearly, as we did our accountability chart the first time, there was a gaping hole of me being in these two seats and going, number one, I can't do both. And like in some areas of my life, I know I have a big ego. In other areas of my life, I try to be quite humble. In this area, I'm all humility. At our size, I need somebody smarter, more experienced in that director of clinical ops role. Like at this point in our leadership world, I need people smarter, better, and more experienced than me and my partner in every key area of the company. I think what's going to drive us is his vision and passion, my ability to lead and operate at a high level, but neither one of us are categorical experts in HR, in marketing, in building clinical teams. And so in order for us to take the next leap, we need that experience. And so we've brought on some really great people. And I think that's going to make my job as integrator easier and better.
This goes back to asking for help, right? What I heard you say is that a year ago or a year and a half ago, you were spinning, but you didn't even know what help to ask for, right? And then as you eventually found a management system, it's a little bit more information, but the fact that you got that little bit more information immediately unlocked a whole next level of growth.
Yep. And looking at the strengths and weaknesses of our team currently, and starting with the strengths and weaknesses of me and my partner, like what are we good at and what are we not good at? And we should really be trying to do as much as what we're good at and not what we're not good at. Now, for the health of the company and for our own sanity.
I think when you take it there, once a company starts to grow actually large enough, I've seen the experience where the founder or the early leaders actually can't maintain their leadership position at the head of the company. They need to, a very, very common one would be something that's maybe in product development, where it just makes sense for the leader to stay focused on product development and not on the execution of the company, because they started the company, they had an idea for a product or a service, they're very good at it. It makes no sense to put that person in an executive role and take them out of the thing that they thrive in and love so much, so that they can manage the company. And that's a hard one for a lot of them.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've thought about in our organization, is there a point in time when we need an MBA that's run a mental health company in multi-state to come in and run the company, right? I think that thought happened more when we didn't have EOS and a structure in place.
Because you didn't feel good enough. You didn't have the information that held you back. So it made you question whether or not you're good enough.
And now that we have that thought is no longer in my mind. But also, interestingly, in our field, right, being clinically led, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important, right? We can backfill with non-clinical people in key areas like finance, right, and HR and billing and all that. But our product is care, right? Unlike, a tech product is the product, right? So but that person's like a product specific, but like our product is care. And having a non-care person lead that product may be the right choice at some point, right? I don't know. But for now, definitely doesn't feel right.
Yeah, it makes sense to me too, that for the size company that you guys are, that understanding why people are coming and not only understanding it on paper, but having lived it, having had the experience of being a practicing therapist, that needs to influence so many of the decisions. And I think what we were talking about before about money is I think the minute that becomes absent from the conversation, right? It doesn't need to be the only thing that's part of the conversation. You brought up Brennan, and he was talking about the same thing in the financial wealth management space and the example that he made that really stuck with me is if you're going to have a financial planner, you want to be with someone who's, God forbid, going to be there and know your situation and your family very well if something bad happened. And that doesn't happen if you're at a big firm where they're just switching people out every 3 or 4 years, right? It strikes me that in this world where we've pursued efficiency and scale in large companies, and maybe with the help of AI, there will be this resurgence towards smaller teams, towards,
This is what we're working on right now. I mean, I think from our clinical team, my Q1 goal is to create a smaller, a smaller group oriented feel with pods that have clinical support and make it feel like a small practice. My goal also is for our therapists, right? Instead of it being round robin that any of our internal staff could answer their question, right? They're assigned a single staff person. That's there 90% of the time, right? So they get to know that person. They get to understand like, oh, Tina's my girl, right? She's the one that always answers my emails, right? Whereas I could round robin that. That could be a business decision, right? That might give us more efficiency, if you will.
Yeah, you could be available 24 hours a day. You could have people overseas. You could,
And again, it's a balance. Like we still have to be available for our clients. So it's not going to be a perfect system, but if we can keep that as our core focus, it helps with retention, which helps to keep people happy, which means they're providing better care. So all those help them the business grow, right? So again, instead of focusing on how to make more money, if we can focus on the best care, providing it as quickly and efficiently as possible, with the best therapists as possible, with the best support as possible, you have to still focus on contracts and stuff. But if all that stuff's going well, you're pretty darn well set up for success, assuming you can, build, collect money.
Yeah, I think there's, not to get too technical with language here, you'll understand it, of course, because it's in your field, but there are hygiene factors and there are more factors, right? And so sometimes when you're trying to make a decision or design a system, there's some things that are just good enough. Like, how good does this need to be? It only needs to be good enough. It should actually not be more than good enough because it's not providing any additional value. And that's like a hygiene factor. And I have found that in my life, a lot of unlocks have come when I figure out what are the hygiene factors for different things rather than just to try to maximize. And this is very common when people design like factory floors.
An entire academic career. It describes my entire academic career.
I came across it in a book called The Goal, which is a very popular book. And it's this narrative, this business fable, but it's about a manufacturing plant. And he just describes how trying to get the whole plant to work at maximum capacity is just suicide. And what you actually have to do is figure out what your 3 or 4 bottlenecks are. And those are the only ones that should run at capacity. And then everything else should run under capacity. And that makes the people feel a lot better. That puts less wear and tear on the machines. That makes sure that you have a steady, reliable outflow. It was a game changer for me, even though I've never had the opportunity to apply it that way because I've never really worked in manufacturing.
Yeah. I mean, it describes my whole academic career. When I got to graduate school, especially in graduate school, psychology graduate school is not hard. It's hard to get into. The hardest classes are the medical classes, like psychology and it's psychopharmacology. But the rest of the course, it's practice. You got to learn the content. You got to practice, whatever. And grades don't matter anymore. No one wants GPA. As long as you don't get like a C or 2, you're good, right? But most people who have gotten into a doctorate level program have spent their entire academic career trying to get A+, right? Trying to get the best grades of their life. When you go to graduate school, the academic coursework, 80% effort, 70% effort gets you between an 88 and a 92% on your test, right? 85% effort gets you like a 99, guaranteed A. A minuses or A pluses in graduate school, at least my graduate school, right? But everyone was putting in 110% effort to get 100. I was like, that's just incredibly wasted effort. We're both walking away with A's. You're spending 6 hours studying. I'm spending an hour studying. Doesn't make any sense, right? And so I worked like 2 jobs in graduate school. Because it just wasn't that hard. And that's not me. I was not the smartest person there. That's not me just have raw intelligence, just being really brilliant. That's not me. It's never been me. But same principle. It's like there's other efforts. And I got business experience because I run a cleaning company.
Right.
And I learned how to study just more efficiently, how to get the most bang for your buck out of the hours that you put in, right? I learned how to communicate with professors when you forgot to do a paper that you said you would hand in by Friday. And learn how to get out of that. Like they learn those other skills, right? But I think that's the same concept, right? I don't know if it's 80-20 rule, but it's like I don't think there's so many hygiene factors in life, and I think people get caught up in trying to do things 100% all the time, and there's just so much wasted energy and time and cognitive load.
I know for me, there's been definitely areas of my life where it would have been very hard to settle for good enough. And it's a pride. This is where the ego, right? We're starting off when you're talking about the ego. This is where like I just take a lot of pride in doing a really good job at that. And there's a particular moment where my pride in doing a great job at that is overshadowing a more real and tangible need because I'm on autopilot. You know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with doing something at 110%. Sometimes there's a lot of joy that you get out of that, but you can't do everything at 110% all the time. And it's really hard to figure out where you are and aren't trying to do that. I remember describing to someone, I was doing a course with a coach, and I said, he said, when was the last time you were unstoppable? And I started describing kind of what I was going through. And I described it in such a way where he goes, that sounds more like mania to me. It was an eye-opening moment. Like it hit me hard. He said something honest. You know what I mean? He said, it hit me hard. And I went, oh man, he's right. Like what I was calling success all these years was mania. You know what I mean? So, well, Doug, man, on that point, thank you very much for making the time today and for sharing your wisdom, your experience. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I'll say, if there is anyone that's interested, reach out to me through Stavros, because there's certain types of therapists that work well with entrepreneurs. That's not that all therapists can't. It's fit really matters. And they don't necessarily have to have experience with entrepreneurs, but most therapists are trained in community mental health settings with significant pathology. And if an entrepreneur comes into that office, they look pretty damn healthy. And so a lot of people just don't know how to apply their skills. They have the skills to help that person, but they didn't necessarily have the experience like I had, that aha moment talking to Brennan, like, oh my gosh, it's not about performance. It's about the potential of not performing, right? That next level, that different flavor of avoidance or distress, or how to like capture the fact that like, this is a good thing, a good mindset some of the time. So I've got different people in my organization that treat all different types of individuals and presenting problems. And in certain states, I've got certain people that I would recommend to friends or family or entrepreneurs that I would connect them with.
If there's an entrepreneur out there struggling a little bit, maybe needing a space to kind of learn a little bit more about themselves or figure out how to overcome a block or a little bit of paralysis, what should they look for? Because I think finding a therapist is hard. So what should they look for? Like, what should their questions be that they ask? What should their criteria be that they evaluate that decision by?
That's a great question. So I think there's two of my favorite acronyms in psychology, CBT and ACT, A-C-T, right? So cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. Acceptance and commitment therapy is sort of the new wave of CBT. If you see, well, keep it really simple. If you see those letters in someone's bio and that says they do that thing, that's probably a good first filter.
Okay.
The second thing would be have they worked with high performers? I think that's the other filter. Because even though somebody who has not does have the skill set, like the tangible training more often than not, if they're trained in CBT and ACT to help you, they just may not speak your language, right? And the fit may be off. So, half of the whole point of therapy is like, do you pick up what this person is saying? Are you pick up what they're putting down? Do you trust them, right? So when I talk to my clients, I talk exactly like I'm talking right now. I curse. I'm directive. I challenge them. Not everyone likes that. So even though I might have the skills to help somebody, the personality style, the fit, the experience isn't the same. So I would say to keep it really simple, look for CBT and ACT, because people that are trained in CBT and ACT tend to have a certain type of, training and ability. And have they worked with high performers in general? That could be lawyers in New York City. It could be finance guys in New York City, right?
Yeah, athletes.
Could be athletes. Could be anybody like that. Those two as very simple filters are probably the first way to get started. The second thing would be any therapist worth their weight and just going to offer you a free consult. Ask them, email them, contact them, ask them if they do a free consult. Request it via video if possible. That way you get a vibe for them on the screen. And I would ask them same questions like, have you worked with high performers? How have you done it? Right. And some of how we started this conversation, not knowing how to ask for help, right, is I would ask them to lead the conversation. This is my first time doing this. I'm looking to explore myself. I'm not even really sure what I need. What should I be telling you that would help you understand if you could help me? Let them own it. And if they don't know how to do that, you're going to feel less confident instantly. Hang up the phone, try somebody else.
Or if they don't do it in a way that vibes with you, right? If they do it in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable or
absolutely. Because at the end of the day, if you don't feel confident in this person, they can have the best skills in the world. You're just not going to buy what they're selling, and it's going to be a waste of your time. So CBT and ACT is a filter. high performers as the secondary filter. The consult call, ask them to tell you what you should be looking for. If you feel confident in them, definitely jump in.
Thank you very much, Doug. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all the wisdom you shared with us today. You have a wonderful rest of your day, man.
Thank you, Stavros. Loved it, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Wednesdays Off. If this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you're interested in building a life and business with more freedom, intention, and community, visit routinerebel.com to learn more. Until next time, keep challenging the status quo and keep building your version of Wednesdays Off.